The golden sunset painted our 10-acre homestead in amber light as I walked the fence line with my daughter, Emma. The evening ritual we had shared since she was old enough to toddle alongside me felt different now. The distant sound of construction equipment had replaced the familiar chorus of crickets and birdsong. I paused at the western edge of our property, my hand resting on the weathered wooden post my grandfather had set into the ground decades ago. "Do you think they will ever stop building, Dad?" Emma asked, her eyes fixed on the sea of partially constructed homes across the road where cornfields had stood just a year ago. "Eventually they will run out of land," I answered, though the words felt hollow even to my own ears. Our cattle ranch had been in the family for 3 generations. My grandfather had purchased these 10 acres with savings from his factory job, determined to build something that would outlast him. My father had expanded the operation, and now it fell to me to preserve what they had built. The centerpiece of our modest herd was Ferdinand, our prize breeding bull. Though massive in size, he possessed a temperament so gentle that Emma had raised him from a calf. The first notice arrived in our mailbox on a Tuesday, printed on expensive cream-colored paper with Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, embossed at the top. I read it twice, confused by its implications. According to the document, our property had been incorporated into the new development's outer ring jurisdiction through some municipal rezoning process I had never heard about. The notice mentioned compliance requirements for all properties visible from community access roads. I called the number listed, expecting a simple clarification. The woman who answered sounded pleasant enough, explaining that while our agricultural activities were grandfathered in, certain aesthetic standards would now apply to our property. "Just small adjustments," she assured me. "Your rustic mailbox will need to be replaced with our standardized model. The height of vegetation along the road needs maintenance. Minor details to keep the community looking cohesive." I thanked her politely, though unease settled in my stomach. Our family had never answered to anyone about how we maintained our land. The notices became more frequent over the following weeks. Our fence needed repainting in an approved color. Our tractor could not be visible from the road. Each requirement seemed designed to erase the agricultural character of our property. Then the patrol car appeared. A white SUV with HOA enforcement, emblazoned on its doors, began making daily circuits past our property. The man behind the wheel would slow to a crawl, taking photographs and making notes. His name was Officer Denton, according to the laminated badge he wore when he finally approached me as I mended a section of fence. "Mr. Mitchell, I am Officer Denton from Community Compliance," he said, not extending his hand in greeting. His eyes swept across our property with obvious disapproval. "I need to inform you about several serious violations that require immediate attention." I straightened up, wiping my palms on my jeans. "This is private property. We have been here long before your development." "The boundaries of the community have legally expanded," he replied, his thin smile never reaching his eyes. "Your continued agricultural activities are under review by the board. The proximity of livestock to a residential area presents health and safety concerns." From the pasture behind us, Ferdinand watched our interaction, his massive frame still as a statue. Denton glanced toward the bull, his expression hardening. "That animal in particular presents a liability issue. The board will need to assess whether it can remain." As he returned to his vehicle, he slapped a final notice against our mailbox. I retrieved it after he drove away, my hands shaking with anger as I read the threatening language about substantial fines for non-compliant agricultural activities. Looking up, I caught Ferdinand's gentle gaze across the pasture. In that moment, I realized this was not about rules or community standards. This was about pushing us out entirely. The battle lines had been drawn, but neither I nor this HOA officer understood how far this conflict would escalate. The manila envelope on my kitchen table grew thicker with each passing day. I had started organizing the violation notices chronologically, watching as the alleged infractions became increasingly absurd. My fingers rifled through the stack, pulling out the most recent addition. Improper agricultural fencing posing aesthetic degradation to community sightlines. I read aloud to Emma, who sat across from me nursing a cup of tea. Unauthorized livestock visible from community access routes. Excessive rural aesthetics diminishing neighborhood property values. Emma sighed, brushing her dark hair away from her face. What does that even mean? Excessive rural aesthetics. We are a rural property. It means they want us gone, I replied, placing the notice with the others. The morning brought another visit from Officer Denton. I watched from the kitchen window as his white SUV crawled past our property line, slowing to a stop near our front gate. He emerged with his clipboard, snapping photographs of our barn. Ferdinand stood at the fence line, his large frame tensing at the sight of the vehicle. The bull pawed at the ground, an uncharacteristic behavior for such a docile animal. My neighbor Dan Miller stopped by later that afternoon, his pickup pulling into our driveway with a spray of gravel. Dan's family had sold their 15 acres to the developers 2 years earlier, accepting what seemed like a generous offer. Now he lived in one of the cookie-cutter homes across the way. "Thought you should know what they are saying about your place," he said, leaning against his truck. "That HOA officer, Denton, he did the same thing to the Johnson farm down the road last year. Hundreds of violation notices until they could not afford the fines. They sold to the developers for half what it was worth." "Why would he target us specifically?" I asked. Dan shrugged. "Word is the development wants to build their community lake where your pasture sits, perfect centerpiece property for their next phase." That evening, I mounted security cameras at strategic points around our property. The system was not cheap, but it seemed necessary given the escalating situation. The next morning, the footage confirmed what I suspected. Officer Denton made 4 separate trips past our property, each time exiting his vehicle to place another notice on our gate. Ferdinand had begun showing visible distress whenever the white patrol car appeared. The normally placid bull would stomp and snort, his massive head swinging from side to side as if in warning. I worried about his health, about the stress affecting him. The quarterly HOA meeting was scheduled at the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center. Though I was technically not a voluntary member, the notices insisted my attendance was mandatory to address ongoing compliance issues. Emma offered to join me for moral support. The community center gleamed with new construction, its modern architecture a stark contrast to our century-old farmhouse. Inside, residents filled rows of chairs facing a raised platform where 7 board members sat behind a long table. I recognized Officer Denton standing to one side, his arms crossed as he surveyed the room. When my name was called during the public comment period, I approached the microphone with a folder containing printed photographs documenting the harassment. Before I could complete my first sentence, the board president, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, raised his hand to interrupt me. "Mr. Mitchell, we are well aware of your ongoing refusal to comply with community standards," he said, his voice amplified through the room's speakers. "Your outdated property is diminishing neighborhood values and creating health hazards for our residents." "My property predates your development by nearly 100 years," I countered, opening my folder. I have documentation of targeted harassment by your enforcement officer. The board president smiled thinly. Perhaps you should consider selling to someone who understands community standards and modern living. Your agricultural activities are simply incompatible with our vision. Laughter rippled through sections of the audience. I felt my face grow hot with humiliation as the board president gavelled the meeting forward to the next agenda item without allowing me to present my evidence. Emma squeezed my arm supportively as we made our way out of the building. The drive home passed in frustrated silence. As we pulled into our driveway, the fading daylight revealed 3 more citations wedged into our front door. The battle was escalating, and it was clear the HOA had no intention of backing down. What they did not understand was that neither did I. This land represented 3 generations of my family's hard work. No collection of paper notices would drive us from it. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Officer Denton conducted his inspection. I watched from behind my kitchen curtains as he moved beyond our front gate, an unprecedented escalation. Previously, he had limited his activities to the public roadway and our mailbox area. Now he walked purposefully across our property, photographing the barn, the cattle water troughs, even the feed storage area. He was trespassing, plain and simple. I grabbed my phone and headed outside, recording video as I approached him. "You are on private property without permission," I called out, keeping my voice steady despite my anger. "Please leave immediately." Officer Denton turned slowly, unsurprised by my appearance. "I am conducting a compliance inspection as authorized by Municipal Code 357B, he replied mechanically, as if reciting from a script. "Your property falls under HOA jurisdiction regardless of your failure to acknowledge proper authority." "There is no such jurisdiction," I insisted, continuing to record. "You need to leave now or I will call the sheriff." A smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "Feel free. They understand how these matters work better than you do." True to his word, when I filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff's department that afternoon, the deputy was sympathetic but unhelpful. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Mitchell," Deputy Collins said, reviewing my written statement. "But these HOA disputes fall into a gray area of jurisdiction. They have their own enforcement protocols that are technically legal if outlined in their charter." "He was trespassing on my land," I emphasized. The deputy nodded. "I recommend consulting with an attorney who specializes in property rights. In the meantime, I will file this complaint, but I cannot promise any action." That complaint, like subsequent ones, was mysteriously lost in the system. The property management company never returned my calls. It seemed every official channel was either indifferent or actively working against us. I installed additional security cameras, focusing on the pasture where Ferdinand spent most of his days. The bull had become increasingly agitated by the daily appearances of the white patrol car, to the point where I worried about his health. A stressed bull could be dangerous, even one as gentle as Ferdinand. The breaking point came early on a Tuesday morning. The security alert pinged my phone at 5:47 a.m. Groggily, I opened the app to see live footage of Officer Denton standing beside our pasture fence. He glanced furtively in both directions before deliberately kicking at the wooden slats. The sound of splintering wood carried clearly through the camera's microphone. I watched in disbelief as he kicked repeatedly, his face contorted with frustration. One board cracked, then another. After checking his watch, he returned to his vehicle and drove away, leaving a damaged section of our fence. I replayed the footage in shock, wondering what could motivate such deliberate destruction. The fence had been Ferdinand's enclosure, and now it had a vulnerable section that might not hold if the bull leaned against it. I called Emma, who was staying at a friend's house for a study group, and asked her to come home early to help me repair the damage. The repair would have to wait until after my shift at the factory. By the time I returned home that evening, dark clouds had gathered overhead, promising a storm. I changed quickly, grabbing my tools to fix the fence before the weather turned. I had just retrieved my hammer from the shed when Emma's panicked voice called from the house. "Dad, Dad, come quick." She burst through the back door, her face pale with alarm. "Ferdinand is gone. The fence is completely broken now." My heart dropped as I followed her to the pasture. The damaged section of fencing had indeed given way, leaving an opening large enough for our bull to pass through. Fresh hoofprints led away from the breach, heading in the direction of the Oak Ridge Estates development. "Get the flashlights and rope halters," I instructed Emma, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "Call Dan and see if he can help search." The evening sky darkened as we followed Ferdinand's distinctive tracks across our property line and toward the manicured lawns of the development. 2,000 pounds of confused bull wandering near suburban homes could end in tragedy. Ferdinand was gentle by nature, but any animal could be unpredictable when frightened. Emma's flashlight beam swept across the ground as we moved between houses, following the deep impressions in the soft grass. Neighborhood security lights began clicking on one by one, sensing our movement. "Do you think he is scared?" Emma asked, her voice small against the growing wind. "Probably confused more than anything," I replied, though worry gnawed at my stomach. "He has never been outside the pasture before." Thunder rumbled in the distance as we pressed deeper into the development. The tracks led steadily toward the community center and its adjacent playground. Finding Ferdinand was our most immediate concern, but I knew this escape was only the beginning of our problems. Officer Denton had deliberately created this situation, and I had the evidence to prove it. What I did not yet know was how to use that evidence before things escalated beyond repair. The eastern sky barely hinted at dawn as our flashlight beams cut through the misty darkness. The storm had passed during our hours of searching, leaving behind a heavy fog that shrouded the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Estates. Ferdinand's massive hoofprints pressed deep into the wet grass, leading us steadily toward the community center. "The tracks are fresher here," Dan observed, crouching to examine an impression in the soft ground. He had joined our search around midnight, bringing extra flashlights and his experience tracking game. "He cannot be far ahead now." Emma shivered in the pre-dawn chill, fatigue evident in her posture after hours of searching. "I hope he is okay. He must be so confused." We followed the trail past silent houses with darkened windows, their identical architectural features blending together in the fog. The community playground emerged from the mist, its colorful plastic structures appearing ghostly in our flashlight beams. Beyond it stood the modern glass-fronted community center where I had been humiliated at the HOA meeting. Then we saw him. Ferdinand stood motionless beside the playground equipment, his dark shape massive against the plastic slides and swing sets. Relief flooded through me at finding him unharmed, but it quickly transformed to concern. He was disoriented, his head swinging slowly from side to side as he processed the unfamiliar surroundings. "Easy approach," I whispered to Emma and Dan. "No sudden movements. I will try to get the halter on him." I removed the rope halter from my shoulder, moving slowly toward Ferdinand while speaking in low, soothing tones. "Hey, big guy, it is okay. We are going to take you home now." Ferdinand's ears twitched in recognition of my voice. He turned toward me, taking a tentative step in my direction. The bull had known me since he was a calf. Despite his intimidating size, we had a bond of trust. Before I could reach him, harsh headlights swept across the playground, bathing everything in blinding white light. The familiar sound of an engine approached rapidly, then tires squealed on wet pavement. The white HOA patrol car pulled to a screeching halt at the edge of the playground, its headlights aimed directly at Ferdinand. Officer Denton emerged from the vehicle, speaking rapidly into a handheld radio. Confirmed. Dangerous livestock at the community center playground, requesting immediate animal control response for removal and impoundment. Denton, I called out, raising my hand to shield my eyes from the glare. Stay back, I have him under control. We are taking him home now. He ignored me completely, returning to his vehicle and revving the engine. To my horror, he began slowly driving toward Ferdinand, using the vehicle to herd my bull against the playground fence. The bright headlights blinded and confused the animal. Stop, I shouted, moving to intercept him. You are going to frighten him. Ferdinand pawed at the ground nervously, his breathing accelerating as the headlights pinned him against the playground equipment. The confident, gentle bull I knew was transforming before my eyes into a cornered animal acting on instinct. Get back, Dan yelled to Emma, recognizing the dangerous situation unfolding. Get behind something solid. Officer Denton continued his advance, the patrol car inching closer to Ferdinand. The bull snorted, lowering his massive head in a warning display that any farmer would recognize as imminent danger. Denton, turn off your engine and back away slowly, I pleaded, my voice rising with urgency. The bull is feeling threatened. This is extremely dangerous. Either he could not hear me over the engine or chose to ignore my warning. The patrol car lurched forward again, the bumper nearly touching Ferdinand's flank. The bull's muscles tensed visibly, even in the dim light. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ferdinand's primal instincts took over, his powerful body launching forward with shocking speed. 2,000 pounds of frightened bull charged directly at the threatening vehicle. The sickening crunch of metal filled the air as the patrol car's front end collapsed under the tremendous impact. The windshield spiderwebbed instantly, safety glass shattering across the playground mulch. Officer Denton's face registered pure shock as his airbag deployed, slamming him back against the driver's seat. The patrol car's front tires lifted momentarily off the ground from the force of Ferdinand's charge, before settling back onto the pavement at an awkward angle. Steam hissed from the crumpled radiator, mixing with the morning fog. One of the playground slides had been bent from being pushed backward by the car's momentum. Ferdinand stepped back from the wreckage, snorting and shaking his massive head as if emerging from a trance. For a terrible moment, I feared he might charge again. Instead, to my astonishment, he turned calmly toward me, all aggression gone from his posture. He approached slowly, accepting the halter as I slipped it over his head, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. "Are you okay?" Emma called, rushing to join us once it was clear the danger had passed. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. Dan stood nearby, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like satisfaction. "That was the most impressive thing I have ever seen," he murmured, eyeing the crumpled patrol car. Inside the vehicle, Officer Denton was moving, clearly injured but conscious. Lights began coming on in nearby houses, curious residents peering out windows at the commotion. Soon there would be witnesses, questions, consequences. I secured the lead rope to Ferdinand's halter, stroking his neck reassuringly. "Let us get him home," I said quietly. "Things are about to get complicated." As we led Ferdinand away from the playground, I glanced back at the destroyed patrol car. Officer Denton had emerged and was leaning against the crumpled hood, his face contorted with rage as he shouted into his phone. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. In that moment, I knew the conflict had escalated beyond anything either of us had anticipated. There would be no going back to the way things were. The first light of dawn broke fully as we led Ferdinand back through our reinforced gate. Emma secured the new chain lock we had added as an extra precaution, while Dan helped me guide the bull back to his stall in the barn rather than the pasture. Despite the chaos left behind at the playground, Ferdinand had walked home calmly, his demeanor now completely relaxed. "He does not even seem to realize what he did," Emma observed, filling his water trough while I checked him for any injuries. "Bulls do not hold grudges," I replied, running my hands along his muscular neck, finding nothing more than a small scrape. "They react to threats and then move on." My phone began ringing before we even finished securing the barn. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, but I had a strong suspicion about the caller's identity. "Mitchell here," I answered, stepping outside into the crisp morning air. "You are legally responsible for this attack." Officer Denton's voice came through immediately, shaking with undisguised rage. "Criminal charges for destruction of property, endangering community safety, housing a dangerous animal in a residential zone." "My bull was loose because someone deliberately damaged my fence," I replied evenly. "I have video evidence of that happening." "Your animal attacked a community safety officer," he continued as if I had not spoken. "Animal control is being dispatched to seize that dangerous beast immediately. The sheriff's department will follow with a warrant for your arrest for criminal negligence." "Do what you need to do," I responded, ending the call as Dan approached with a concerned expression. "That sounded pleasant," he remarked sardonically. I rubbed my tired eyes. "We need to prepare for what comes next. Can you help me secure video backups of everything, especially the fence damage footage?" Dan nodded, already thinking the same thing. "I will set up a cloud backup right away." By mid-morning, word had spread throughout Oak Ridge Estates and the surrounding area. Neighbors from both the development and the remaining rural properties called or stopped by, each with their own version of events they had heard. The story was morphing with each retelling. Ferdinand had gone on a rampage. Officer Denton had been critically injured. The HOA was filing for emergency removal of all farm animals in the township. Shortly after noon, my phone chimed with an emergency alert from the Oak Ridge Estates HOA system. An emergency community meeting had been called for 3:00 p.m. to address the dangerous animal incident and resulting community safety protocols. Emma looked up from her laptop where she had been reviewing our security footage. "Are we going?" "We have to," I answered, pulling up a chair beside her. "What have you found?" She clicked through several video clips. "The fence damage is clear as day. 5 separate kicks, deliberate destruction. The timestamp shows 5:47 a.m. yesterday, but there is something else you should see." She opened another file showing Officer Denton speaking with 2 men in business suits near our property line 3 days earlier. Though there was no audio, their animated gestures toward our pasture and the development's lake area seemed to confirm Dan's suspicion about their interest in our land. At 2:45 p.m., Emma and I walked into the community center. The room had been arranged differently from the quarterly meeting, with chairs in a semicircle facing a podium. Nearly every seat was filled, and conversations hushed as we entered. Some residents openly stared, while others whispered behind their hands. Officer Denton sat in the front row, his arm in a theatrical sling. his face bearing a small bandage across the bridge of his nose. He glared at us as we found seats near the back. The board president called the meeting to order precisely at 3:00 p.m. "We have called this emergency session to address the dangerous incident that occurred this morning at our community playground," he announced gravely. "Officer Denton will present his account of the events." Denton approached the podium slowly, emphasizing his apparent injuries with a pronounced limp that had not been visible earlier that morning. His description of the incident bore little resemblance to reality. "While conducting a routine safety inspection, I encountered an aggressive bull that had escaped its enclosure," he stated, his voice carrying through the room's speakers. "Despite my efforts to protect community property using authorized protocols, the animal charged and attacked my vehicle in what can only be described as a vicious assault." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The board president returned to the podium, his expression solemn. "The board has consulted with legal counsel and will be pursuing immediate action for removal of this dangerous animal and appropriate penalties against the negligent owner," he announced. "Community safety must be our highest priority." I sat quietly through the remainder of the meeting, recognizing that this forum offered no opportunity for fair hearing. As residents filed out afterward, most avoided eye contact with us. Only one elderly woman nodded sympathetically in our direction. As the room emptied, a woman I recognized as Mrs. Winters approached our seats. She lived in the house directly across from our property, her backyard facing our pasture fence. Without speaking, she pressed a small USB drive into my palm. "My security cameras face your fence line," she whispered, glancing toward the board members still gathered near the podium. "I saw everything that happened yesterday morning. That officer deliberately damaged your property." Before I could thank her, she walked away, blending into the departing crowd. That evening, Emma and I reviewed Mrs. Winters' footage alongside our own. Her camera had captured a different angle of Officer Denton attacking our fence, providing irrefutable evidence from an independent source. The combined videos told a complete story of deliberate sabotage that had directly caused Ferdinand's escape. My hands shook slightly as I copied the files to multiple secure locations. The evidence changed everything. The question now was how to use this unexpected advantage most effectively before the HOA could move forward with their threats against Ferdinand and our property. The law office of Hammond Agricultural Rights sat above the feed store in the neighboring county, its weathered wooden sign barely visible from the road below. Inside, wood-paneled walls displayed framed newspaper articles chronicling property disputes won against developers, testimonials from farm families who had preserved their land rights, and photographs of attorney Hammond shaking hands with grateful clients in front of rural properties. I had called ahead, describing our situation in careful detail. The receptionist had scheduled us immediately, recognizing the urgency. Now, Emma and I sat across from Attorney Hammond himself, a man whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of his own farming background before law school. "Start from the beginning," he instructed, legal pad ready. "Every interaction with this HOA and particularly this enforcement officer." For the next hour, I methodically outlined the progression of events while Emma connected her laptop to his office television, displaying key video evidence at appropriate moments. Attorney Hammond took notes silently, his expression revealing nothing until the video clearly showed Officer Denton attacking our fence. "Stop there," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "Play that section again." We watched once more as Denton deliberately kicked at the wooden slats, checking his surroundings furtively between assaults on the fence. Attorney Hammond closed his laptop with a decisive click. "This changes the entire equation," he stated, his voice taking on a new energy. "They came after the wrong farmer this time." He stood, packing behind his desk. "The HOA is counting on intimidation and your lack of resources to fight a legal battle. They expect you to buckle under threats of fines, animal seizure, and criminal charges. But this evidence shifts everything in your favor." "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Not what they expect," he replied with the hint of a smile. "No emotional public confrontations, no angry denials. Instead, we prepare a comprehensive dossier for each HOA board member individually." He outlined his strategy meticulously. We would compile individual packages containing photographs, video evidence with timestamps, documentation of every interaction with Officer Denton, and most importantly, the fence damage that precipitated Ferdinand's escape. The direct approach to board members in their capacity as individuals rather than as a collective entity creates personal liability awareness, Hammond explained. When they understand their personal exposure in this situation, priorities tend to shift quickly. Over the next 2 days, Emma and I worked alongside Hammond to create 7 identical packages. The attorney also reached out to his network, locating 3 previous landowners who had experienced similar patterns of harassment from Officer Denton, followed by pressure to sell their properties to Oak Ridge Development Partners. Their signed statements added a devastating new dimension to our evidence. On Thursday afternoon, I drove alone to Oak Ridge Estates, the 7 sealed envelopes on my passenger seat. My first stop was the home of board member Caroline Chen, whose address Hammond had provided from public HOA records. She answered her door hesitantly, clearly surprised to see me on her doorstep. "Mr. Mitchell," she acknowledged cautiously, "what can I do for you?" I wanted to personally deliver this information package regarding the incident with Officer Denton and my bull, I explained calmly, offering the envelope. "It contains video evidence you may not have seen during the emergency meeting." She accepted the envelope with visible reluctance, her expression guarded. "5 more board members will receive identical evidence packages today," I continued in the same measured tone. "We request a private meeting tomorrow evening to discuss resolution options before this becomes a matter of public record." Her eyes widened slightly at the implicit meaning, public record. "My attorney has prepared alternative courses of action depending on the board's willingness to review all evidence fairly," I explained. "We prefer a private resolution that protects everyone's interests." I continued my deliveries methodically, receiving similar reactions at each house. At the board president's residence, his wife accepted the envelope with assurances he would review it promptly. By nightfall, as Emma and I sat at our kitchen table reviewing our notes for the next day's potential meeting, my phone rang. The screen displayed the board president's personal number. "Mr. Mitchell," his voice notably lacked its usual condescension, "I have reviewed your materials and consulted with several board members. We would like to move our meeting up to tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. if that suits your schedule." "My attorney and I will be there," I confirmed, catching Emma's eye across the table. "That will be fine," he replied after a brief pause, "and it might be best if Officer Denton is not present for this initial discussion, to keep things productive." After ending the call, I sat back in my chair, allowing myself the first genuine sense of hope since this conflict began. The strategic approach was working exactly as Hammond had predicted. By morning, we would know whether the HOA was prepared to negotiate a fair resolution or if we would need to pursue more public remedies. Morning sunlight streamed through the community center windows as 7 board members sat rigidly across the conference table. Attorney Hammond and I occupied chairs on the opposite side, with our evidence folders neatly arranged before us. The board had brought their legal counsel, an older gentleman who sat at one end of their table, occasionally whispering to the president. The atmosphere was tense but cordial, a stark contrast to previous confrontational meetings. Officer Denton's absence was conspicuous, exactly as the board president had suggested. Hammond placed a single document before them, our terms for resolution. The room remained silent as they read, exchanging nervous glances at the evidence citations listed in the margins. Officer Denton has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, the board president finally offered, his voice carefully neutral. We take the allegations of property damage very seriously. Hammond nodded professionally. And the other matters, the harassment campaign, the improper inclusion of my client's property within HOA boundaries. There seems to have been some overreach in jurisdiction application, the board's attorney acknowledged reluctantly. The original municipal filing shows some discrepancies that should be addressed. My attorney slid forward additional documentation, statements from former landowners detailing identical patterns of harassment, followed by property acquisitions by Oak Ridge Development Partners. The color drained from faces around the table as the connections became clear. We have documented 3 previous instances of similar tactics, Hammond stated calmly, each resulting in property sales to your development partner at below market value, a pattern that would be of significant interest to county authorities and potentially state investigators. The board president cleared his throat uncomfortably. What exactly are you proposing as resolution? For the next 3 hours, attorneys from both sides negotiated terms, occasionally stepping out for private consultations. By early afternoon, we had reached a comprehensive settlement, full property exemption from HOA jurisdiction, compensation for fence damage, and a binding non-disclosure agreement protecting all parties from public embarrassment. Most importantly, Ferdinand would remain on our property with no further challenges to his presence. As we prepared to leave, the board president approached me privately. For what it is worth, most of us had no idea what Denton was doing, he said quietly. The development company promised certain amenities that required additional land acquisition. Some people allowed ambition to override ethics. I nodded, accepting the explanation without comment. The truth was in the signed settlement papers in Hammond's briefcase, not in belated justifications. 2 weeks later, a construction crew arrived at our property. They erected a new, sturdy fence line with proper surveyor markers establishing our boundaries. The crew foreman handed me official documentation showing our property as a legally designated agricultural exemption from all surrounding HOA covenants. The white patrol car never returned to our road. According to Dan's contacts within the development, Officer Denton had been terminated and left the area entirely. The development company issued a statement announcing a redesign of their Plan Lake project to preserve the rural character of the community perimeter. Standing at the fence line one evening the following month, I watched Ferdinand grazing peacefully in the pasture, occasionally glancing toward the development with what I swear looked like satisfaction. Emma joined me, leaning against the